Thank you all for joining us on the holiday edition of the Ivy League Hoops Hour, where we cover all things men's basketball in the Ancient Eight. We are your hub, your go-to, your day one, but not really, though. I'm your co-host, Coach Sidney Johnson, former head coach of the Princeton Tigers from 2007 to 2011, and former three-time captain of the Tigers in 95, 96, and 97. And I am joined by my co-host, Princeton alum and former Princeton graduate assistant coach, Lawrence L-Boogie Schuler. Lawrence, how you making out?
I'm feeling great, Coach, filled with holiday cheer. How about you?
I am wrapped up in the holiday spirit, Lawrence, and I'm so excited about this week's show, highlighted by the interview with our near and dear friend for many years, the outstanding basketball coach, the head coach of the Cornell Big Red, Brian Earl. In addition to our conversation with Coach Earl, we're going to cover mid-major basketball and a lot of other things in terms of scheduling in the Ancient Eight, but we cannot do any of this without you all. So please email us your questions, your comments, your stances on different topics that we cover, recommended guests, the whole gamut. Email us at ivyleaguehoopshour@gmail.com, and we will be sure to cover your input in the next show. It's been a labor of love. Let's get right into it on the Ivy League Hoops Hour. And here we are again on the festive edition of the Ivy League Hoops Hour. Normally, we would go into our segment of My Eyes Don't Lie to Me, Lawrence, but because of COVID, we don't have a lot of games to choose from. So we decided for our listeners to go through the stocking stuffers left behind by St. Nick over our fireplace, Lawrence, and see what we have to divvy out in terms of gifts throughout the league. Lawrence, what do we have first?
The first one looks like a large cutout D and picket fence.
Ooh, I like that one for the Brown Bears defense. I have Brown as the third seed in the upcoming Ivy Madness postseason tournament, not held till March, but Mike Martin's crew, a 9 to 10 man rotation, Lawrence, they are limiting opponents to a league best 0.935 points per possession, which actually ranks in the top 100 in the country in terms of defensive efficiency. The Bears continue to be the only team in the Ivy League that holds teams under 1 point per possession on the road. Stout is the word that I would use for the Bears defense.
Yeah, that sounds perfect, Coach. The next one we have is a top hat and a magic wand.
Taking people by surprise. How about the Cornell Big Red, Lawrence? The favored teams of recent memory seem to be James Jones's Yale and Tommy Amaker's Harvard, and for very good reason. 9 of the past 10 regular season Ivy League championships have been shared or won outright by either Harvard or Yale. So everyone will be forgiven for not choosing the Cornell Big Red as one of the top teams in the Ivies. Brian Earl's group is 8-2, owning the league's top winning percentage and dominating the conference in offensive numbers, including points per game, scoring margin, assists per game, and assists to turnover ratio. Not quite the best team in the league, Lawrence. That distinction goes to this year's Princeton Tigers, but unquestionably the surprise team of the season. That has to go to the Cornell Big Red.
I'm right there with you, Coach. Our next stocking stuffer is an industrial spotlight.
A spotlight. You mean shining a light. How about shining a light on the league, Lawrence, with the best win of the season to date? And that would have to go to Princeton over South Carolina. Mitch Henderson and his Tigers earned a 66-62 win over SEC opponent South Carolina. In the first round of the Asheville Championship played on ESPN, the Tigers made shots, they made plays, and they certainly made headlines for the league, as everyone in the league seemed to get off to a hot start this season. Dartmouth made noise with a win at Georgetown. Yale knocked off UMass, but I still think that Tigers win will hold up, at least to date, as the best non-conference win for the Ivy League. And looking in our bag here, Lawrence, it looks like our last two stocking stuffers are inspired by two of the greatest Christmas movies of all time.
Indeed. Our next one is an official Red Ryder carbine action 200 shot range model air rifle with a compass in the stock and this thing that tells time.
Those of you in the know recognize that Lawrence is referring to A Christmas Story, an absolute classic, and we're going to gift that rifle to Keller Boothby, who might just be the best shooter in the Ivy League. Now, it takes one to know one, as Cornell head coach Brian Earl, former owner of the all-time three-point record in the Ivy League, recruited Keller Boothby out of Prestonwood Christian Academy in Plano, Texas. The 6'7" sophomore forward is competing in his first season of Division I basketball. We all know because last year there was no athletic play in the Ivy League, but Boothby is looking like a KG veteran. He leads the Big Red in three-point makes, attempts, and three-point percentage. He is also the second leading scorer on the team and is flirting with the NCAA single-season record for three-point percentage owned by Micah Mason of Duquesne back in the 2013-14 season. And our last stocking stuffer, Lawrence?
It's a Blu-ray copy of 1988's Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman classic, Die Hard.
Oh, that is a classic, Lawrence. And that, I have to gift that to Penn's challenging strength of schedule and head coach Steve Donahue. He has to be saying to himself, yippee-ki-yay. My heart goes out to Coach Donahue and the Penn Quakers, if they have been saddled with a Hollywood hero's burden in terms of their non-conference schedule. With a playing rotation predominantly comprised of freshmen and sophomores, the Quakers are facing tough opponents night after night after night, with the 67th toughest schedule in the country, according to TeamRankings.com, and no one in the Ancient Eight ranks higher than 138. And Lawrence, that'll bring a close to our holiday gift segment as all of our stocking stuffers are passed out. And yes, the final verdict is in. Die Hard is indeed a classic Christmas movie. Coming up next, our interview with the Cornell Big Red head coach, Brian Earl. This week, it's a personal joy of mine to let you in on a conversation with myself, Lawrence, and a mutual friend of ours who just happens to be the head coach of the Cornell Big Red. This gentleman and I played together at Princeton during the 96 and 97 seasons. Frankly, folks, two of the best seasons of my life as a basketball player. I graduated, and he continued on to become a legendary player at Princeton, earning 1999 Ivy League Player of the Year and leading the Tigers to 3 NCAA berths and 1 NIT appearance during his stellar 4-year career. After a pro basketball stint and time in the corporate world, he worked alongside yours truly as an assistant coach at Princeton beginning in 2007 and remained at Princeton as an assistant coach alongside our mutual Princeton teammate, Mitch Henderson, in 2011. Now, as the head coach of the Cornell Big Red, he is the only Ivy League coach not at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Penn to lead his team into the Ivy Madness postseason tournament, doing so in 2018. The architect of one of the nation's fastest and most efficient offenses in this current season of 21-22, he is recognized as one of the best tacticians in the game. I just call him a friend. Here's our conversation with the Cornell Big Reds, Brian Earl. And to start with that, Brian, I actually want Lawrence to share with you what our day was yesterday.
Well, Brian, Coach Earl, between the two of us, between me and Sid, we've known you for decades now. Right. And yet this was the hardest, longest interview prep that we've ever done. So we're on the phone and we're debating archetypes and artifice and formality and structure. And Sid is saying, I just want to make sure we ask these 3 questions. And in the end, we came to Brian Earl blasting you too in the office. So can I ask, do you still have elevation on an endless loop?
No. you must have caught that. I'm like a Pandora Amazon Music guy, so whatever they hit me with is what I'm listening to. So, but it is a lot of 90s, 80s, U2, Springsteen, Stones type stuff. So I can't believe you're boxing me into the one U2 song that was popular 15 years ago or whatever, but that's all right. Man, this is how bad, like this is how things are created in this internet world, Lawrence. Just now you're making U2 my favorite band, and that's all I do, but I'm much more cultured than that.
Fair enough. Brian, there's no exaggeration with Lawrence. It was literally an hour and 40 minutes of trying to get our act together to have you on. I'm not exaggerating. And then we also came to this, and you legitimately have to settle this debate. Like, so part of it too was going back and forth on what a mid-major team is, and you have to break the tie. So take the Ivy League out of it so you don't hurt any feelings or name any names or something, but seriously, define what a mid-major team is, if there is one, or a mid-major program. What does that look like to you?
That I'm not. I don't know. I'm the worst person to ask. I know what a high major is. Mid-major, I don't know. It's so hard to sort of make that put it in a box like that, because there's some teams at the top of their conferences that are probably a low major conference that are definitely mid-major team. And so what is a mid-major? It would have to be individually determined, but a team that can compete with anyone in the country. I'm not into saying, oh, this team is in a mid-major conference and, it loses to low majors or whatever it is. I sort of look at it as an individual basis. So did I just cop out of the question?
No, I actually think it's the best answer I've ever heard, and I'm being very serious. Now, Lawrence, do you want to share where you come out on it?
How much time you got?
Fire
not
away.
A lot.
Yes, not a lot, but be concise.
Not an hour 40.
There you go.
It seems to me, as far as I can tell, a mid-major is a team that wins its games, but you still don't respect them. Or it's a team that you're obliged to respect, even though they don't win any games.
Huh.
All right.
That's very philosophical.
Yeah. He goes there, Brian. Let me give you mine. Nobody cares.
Oh man, I didn't know I could do that.
Yes, you're allowed. All right. You're a friend of the show. Nobody cares. The relevancy of a mid-major, like people inside the sport, coaches like you and I and others, ADs who actually have a clue, know that there's exactly what you said. There are high major teams, and then there's everybody else. Right. There's multi-million-dollar budgets, 10 to 20,000 seat arenas, a financial and institutional commitment to being good every year. There's games on linear platforms like ESPN, Fox Sports, And, with all due respect, when you webcast your games online with Joe Homer doing the play-by-play, I'm not qualifying that as high major. So It's like it's Colorado State, Mountain West, undefeated, top 15. They're mid-major, like 9-3 Norfolk, UMass Lowell, and UMass. Like, respectfully, Brian.
Right.
They're mid-majors. And no one cares because of just what you said. No one wants to throw their hat into the ring of being a low major except the HBCUs who they have to play 8 to 10 guarantee games to fund their departments. So they're like, all right, fine, if you want to call us low major. But Prairie View A&M, to your point, Brian, they can go and play just about anybody and compete. Right. They just can't afford to travel.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to, like I said, box teams into low major, mid major, and everybody does it, but there's so many things behind the scenes that go on. We played Coppin State this year, and they haven't had a home game since they played Loyola months ago. And that's a difficult situation. And so I know everyone from the outside looks at it as it's college basketball. So, you should be able to do this or that, but there's when you get into the nuts and bolts of it, everything is so different at different places. And you know that I'm close to Colgate and what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
Are they a mid-major? They don't have the greatest record, but they've also had to play an incredibly hard schedule because of the success they've had over the last few years. And so that's a tough question to answer, I would say.
Yeah. And you're referring to Matt Lango, who's a childhood friend of yours, and rival at Penn when he was playing. And yeah, he's done an outstanding job and almost a victim of his success. And they are clearly mid-major in the sense that they can go on the road and compete and beat just about anybody over these last few years. Right. Let's switch tracks, and it's actually perfect as we're talking about referencing Penn. Do you remember March 2011? Me and you were coaching together at Princeton. We have to go to Penn to win and tie the Ivy League championship to force a playoff game. And there's a timeout late or somewhere in the second half. And I turn to you and Tony Newsom, Tony, one of our guys, great assistant coach with us. And I turn to you two and I say, I'm going to lose my on these guys. And then I need you to coach them after I do. I'm wondering if you vaguely remember that. And if you don't, it's fine. But if you do, I just want to know what you said X's and O's to them, because I just remember going off on them, trying to get them to go harder. But do you recall that at all?
I don't recall. I recall those huddles being obviously just like that, intense. And what was great is that you would do stuff like that, like give some of the steering wheel to the assistant coaches. And we knew when those moments would happen that, you had to balance out your intensity with some tactics or your tactics with some of our intensity. And so it made a great crew. I don't remember that specifically, but I remember just like sort of us playing together. It was, you find the areas where you complement each other, but I'll take all the credit because we won that game.
Yeah.
So,
that's what I'm saying.
You could edit it out and just give me all the credit. That would be perfect.
No, we're keeping it all in and giving you and Tony all the credit, because we did. There was some reaction. There were some X's and O's, and I'm not taking credit for the X's and O's from that point to the end. You two get that, and I'll take credit for the emotion, and I'll piggyback and say this. With that team, Brian, 2011 Ivy League championship, I remember being perfectly in sync with those guys, with our staff, with you and the staff and the players. Every emotion that we had as a staff seemed to be like confirmed in practices or games. Every reaction that the players had was something that we wanted. The leadership, Mavrides, Saunders, Maddox. Tell me do you have that similar feeling? And then present day, you're the head coach at Cornell. Have you been able to experience that feeling of just kind of being perfectly in sync with one of your teams?
I remember that team, and it was such a battle. And when you do have those close battles, we had them as players and then together as a coaching staff, that, yeah, you at a certain point, you realize we're all going in the same direction. And there's little things that you may not agree with as a player or a coach, but it's that culture, that frame of mind that you're all on the same page where, hey, this is where we're going. Let's do it together as 20-something people. And so I do remember that team. And I actually remember having a conversation with you about, we were awesome defensive team. And most of that was because of you. And our offense was a little bit, it wasn't as pretty as people remember the Princeton offense. And
yep.
I remember talking to you and you said we had these two very athletic forwards, Ian Hummer and Kareem Maddox. And you're like, listen, we're just going to cut one of those guys and throw it into him in the post. And then the other guy's going to run to the other block. And that's the offense. And I was like, the alarm bells of the Princeton family went off in my head, because it was different. But, I think when you did that, I don't know when it was, but we just committed to it, and it wasn't pretty, but we won most games on defense. And so that I remember a lot, is that, the way I played and the way you played and we all played was different than how that team won, especially offensively. But we all just threw everything we had behind it into the ultimate goal, which is to try to get to the tournament, which we actually did. And so here at Cornell, we've had moments where we're all rowing in the same direction. Haven't been to be able to go to the NCAA tournament or anything like that, but you see glimpses of it. And that's most of the struggle with teams, is just getting everybody to be bought in. And people talk about it all the time, but it rarely happens as well as it does or did with that team. Right.
How about this, Brian? I want to you talk about spreading the credit around. I want to give Lawrence a credit on this one. He and I were, again, in our preparation for having you on, we were going back and forth and talking about, Lawrence made the point about there's as many or more differences in and for lack of a better term, I'm just going to use like the P. Carrillo disciples, coaches who've coaching now who've played for coach. Okay. There's as much variety and differences in how we are all running the offense than there are between us as a group and anybody else running the offense who never played for coach. So you mentioned like my tweaks, and I call it, remember I tagged that like 3 around 2.
Right.
And just anytime we hit one of those two fools, the other's going to the other block, and let's move and play and hoop. And so now I'm talking about Brian Earl running the Princeton offense, and you guys rank in the top 20 in terms of number of possessions per game, 76 roughly. And Air Force, coached by our very own Joe Scott, and they rank 352nd in possessions per game. I mean, they're playing slow. Like there's no other way to put it.
Right.
And that's coach. That's cool. But, how did you get here? Now that we shared the backcourt together with Mitch. We played in one of the slowest ways of playing under Coach Carrillo. Coach Carmody loosened it up a little bit, but there's so many variances. Credit my buddy L-Boogie for this, but how did you get here? How did you get from playing in the slow offense, playing under a more methodical approach with Coach Carrillo and Carmody and influenced by Joe Scott, and now, Brian, you're playing fast, and I want to credit you, my friend, for how efficiently as well. How did you get here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're influenced by everybody, but I did miss sort of the recruiting periods. They have these AAU periods where you go out for 3 or 4 or 5 days at a time, and you're watching AAU games from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., but you're also sitting with colleagues and just talking through different things. And so a lot of it is bouncing ideas off of each other. Obviously, Carrill and Carmody and Thompson, Coach Thompson and Joe Scott and Coach Levy, all the guys we played for are a huge part of what we are. But, like my brother's a coach at VMI. They play fast. And the last year, COVID, for us, we got canceled. And so as a basketball coach, my year was spent at Cornell, and we were actually doing shifts, walking around campus. So basically, You're on ESPN Plus watching whatever games you can watch in your spare time, and then having these sort of weird practices where people can't come within 6 feet of each other and not too many people in the gym at one time. And so it's like a sabbatical year. And so as you're trudging through the snow in Ithaca, looking off into the distance, you're thinking of ways to play. And then I was watching my brother a lot, VMI, and they played fast. And I think Carrill, even in his book during the 1970s, when he had Brian and these really great players and Petrie, and I don't think anyone was averse to playing fast or slow or whatever it may be. I think the thing about what we all do is try to get the best shot we can get.
Sometimes on the Ivy League Hoops Hour, we'll have guests that Lawrence and I have known for years, like this week's Cornell Big Red head coach, Brian Earl. But on another week, it could be a student athlete we've just come across, a coach, a referee, an administrator. Who knows who will be on the show next? And that's where you come in, folks. Please, we encourage you to email us, send us your suggestions on guests, topics to cover, where you stand on any debates between me and Lawrence, point, counterpoint. Please email us at ivyleaguehoopshour gmail.com, and we assure you we'll work your suggestions into the show. Now, let's get back to our conversation with the Cornell Big Reds head coach, Brian Earl. Got it. Brian, your dad played at Rutgers. Your brother played at Penn State. He goes to the Sweet 16. Obviously, you're a legend at Princeton, and you get the team. The Tigers were ranked top 10 in your junior year, and you guys make an outstanding NIT run your senior year. You're a star player in high school. You played overseas. You come from a basketball family, if there ever was one. And yet, you didn't go into coaching right away, and maybe a little reluctant to go into coaching right away. But you were born to coach. You're a natural. So explain that for us listeners. And I've always wanted to ask you that, like, honestly, because I remember our initial conversations as I was like, come on, man, I need you. You're my first call. Like we got to do this. And I really wasn't confident about myself. I think I've shared this with you, without having you there with me at Princeton, but it wasn't something you were already doing. Why?
I played Princeton and then had a short professional career after, and was just sort of interested in other things to try out, and I had a good time. I worked at Sallie Mae, which is basically a student loan company, but in different parts of the company doing pretty interesting things. And in the meantime, my brother had become a coach. You had become a coach at Georgetown. Mitch Henderson, who's one of our best friends, had become a coach at Northwestern, and Coach Thompson and all these guys. And so I stayed in touch because we're such good friends. And, I always would tell you what you guys were doing wrong constantly. But glad you picked up on that. But yeah, so it's a different life when I was at Sallie Mae, much less of the stress that you have as a coach. And to be honest with you, I remember vividly, I was at a wedding in New Orleans of one of my good friends, Matt Westfall from high school. And all the stuff was happening where the Princeton job had come open, and we knew that you were potentially going to get it. And it was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, everyone's smiling. And you called me and basically said, we need you back at Princeton. And I was sort of like, life's pretty good. I have an expense account. I'm not working too hard, and they're paying me well. And you just sort of kept going at it. It was 2008, so things were falling apart a little bit in finance, and it just sort of fell together. I don't know if I knew exactly what I was getting into from the. So
basically,
side.
You're saying I was your escape route. It wasn't that you wanted to buddy up with me and try to turn this thing around.
No. I would love. We should rewind that and be like, yes, it was this moment. But I was always looking at it from afar, and the time just hit at the right moment. And like you said, I remember having gone to Princeton and growing up, never thinking you could go to an Ivy League school, and not realizing you could actually do it until maybe a year before. And I still, to this day, have an appreciation for anyone who's ever associated with Princeton for allowing me to get in there and me graduating. And so you hit that button pretty hard with me, that you need to give back a little bit, and you're needed, and we need to be together there, and let's turn this thing around. And so I'm always appreciative to the Princeton community for me having gone there. And so there was a little bit of like, let's turn around and give back a little bit too.
Tell us a little bit more how you mean it was such an incredible opportunity for you to go there, and never really seeing that as an option for you. What do you mean?
Yeah, I was a good basketball player at a high school. My grades were good, but I was not as good as Lawrence with my grades. And a lot of the people at Princeton clearly were just more prepared. I went to a large public school. You're in class with 30 other kids, and I needed a lot of help academically. And so that's the thing that jumps out at you is, I didn't go to a prep school. I had never been in a class where there's 8 other kids and you really have to have an opinion on the 300 pages you were supposed to read the night before.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, I wasn't prepared for that. And I think a lot of people at Princeton, the coaching staff and admissions, they took a gamble on me, and it's one of the greatest universities in the world, I say now, but it opens a lot of doors, and I'm grateful for that. There were a lot of people who weren't sure from my high school if I should have gotten into an Ivy League school, and they may have been right. And so it keeps a lot of doors open for me. And again, I'm grateful for everybody who made that a possibility for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful myself. I couldn't have seen my experience there any differently without you and Gabe and Steve and Mitch and Jesse and Jo and all those guys. And I think we brought something to the institution that it might not have had without all of us being there,
Right.
like grades and whatever, just these different lives to bring to the university. And then you mentioned grateful. I'm grateful, having you by my side. I'm thinking of Scott Greenman, Dan Conley, Tony Newsom as we're coaching. But you do plunge into coaching. You are a natural as an assistant. I leaned on you a ton, but there was obviously a point where you knew you were ready to be a head coach. There's always assistant coaches, always, I think good ones, always have that realization. I'm wondering when that moment, do you remember that moment when you're at Princeton as an assistant and you're like, I'm ready and I want to be a head coach? And then how quickly did the Cornell opportunity come after that realization?
Yeah, I think most assistants feel, a couple years in that you think you'd be a great head coach, and you have ideas that you would do that might be a little different. I don't remember a time, and I remember knowing that I must not be the only person who thinks they would be a great head coach. And pretty much everybody's probably going to think it, and there's not an incredible success rate. So just be patient with it. And what you don't realize, and looking back, there's so much that is on your plate as a head coach that you don't realize when you're an assistant coach. And that's the biggest thing. It's not necessarily basketball wise, but a lot of the stuff off the court, academics, issues with kids that you keep private, parents, etc. And so I don't know if you're ever really ready, but if you never take the leap, you'll never know. And so, with the Cornell thing, you had moved on, and I'm working with one of my great friends, and Mitch Henderson at Princeton. And like so many coaches, you have to wait for the perfect opportunity. And I think when the Cornell job came open, Dartmouth also came open. Having been at Princeton for so long as a player and a coach, you knew that maybe this was an opportunity that fits your skill set. You might have the things that these places are looking for in the new coach. And so when that happened, you really attack those job openings to make sure that your hat's in the ring. So you make mistakes as soon as you start as a head coach. You have so many decisions that fall on your plate. And so, like I said, you have to know that you were the smartest assistant coach in the world, and you immediately become the dumbest head coach when you're hired. And that's the only way you find that out, is by doing it.
Yeah. Finish the sentence. The type of player who is going to thrive in a Brian Earl coach team has these qualities:
selflessness, intensity, and probably basketball IQ. And it's tough getting a player with all of those attributes. You're always looking for those things. It's hard to recruit to that because a lot of it is what you don't see in sort of our AAU environments. But to play the way we play, especially now, and understand how we're all on the same page, you need some of that IQ to understand. You need to pass up some opportunities to get us the best option offensively and defensively. Toughness, it's not as crazy as it was when we played with coaching, but it's sort of the last place on college campuses maybe where you get the truth told to you most of the time. And so you got to develop a thick skin. And in any program, you need to have that sort of toughness. And, those are some of the qualities that I think you're constantly striving to find, but it is hard in recruiting to find it just by watching the basketball, and even in recruiting and talking to players. It's hard to see the light that might have you back off if they don't have some of those qualities.
Well, right now at this stage in the game, Brian, you guys are at the tops of, the win tally in the Ancient Eight, and so you've clearly found some of that in a whole host of guys. You're playing a lot of guys. You're playing fast. You're playing efficiently. And Brian, I just not trying to be weird because we don't always talk this way as friends, but I'm proud of you and I'm happy for you, and I'm looking forward for you to keep it rolling as you're looking ahead. And I know COVID is kind of threatening a lot of teams, not only just folks in the Ivy League, but look ahead, Brian, whether it's with your team on campus in the Ivy League. We always kind of round out our interviews with allowing our guests to just kind of take the platform. And is there anything that you'd like to see kind of happen in the near future if Brian Earl was the czar of whatever it needs to be? What would that look like?
One of the greatest things I remember is being on bus rides with Lawrence and you and talking about different things. I will say I'm still stuck on, I don't know if this is the question that you're asking, but the NCAA tournament, to me, why we're at 68 teams, 64 with some sort of play-in, just we used to talk about, there's all these like high majors that should or shouldn't be on the bubble, and they add 4 more teams. Mm-hmm. And then you just create another bubble behind it. So I was always interested in why, if you double it to 128 teams in the tournament, mm-hmm. that's one more game to get down to 64. And most people in March want to watch games anyway. So it doesn't matter if you have a team that somehow won the conference tournament with a 12-17 record, play Duke, get smoked, and then the next weekend, we're down to 64 anyway. So I would like to sort of see it maybe expanded. And there's always the discussion about the Ivy League having, for years, never having a conference tournament. And so if you won the conference regular season, you got to the tournament, which was, for us, it was a battle. Yeah. Because you never could rely on that conference tournament. But you also did say there was not a ton of competition when teams knew they had nothing to play for. And so they fixed that with a conference tournament. But that can go the other way sometimes where your best team isn't represented. So I don't know. I would find it fascinating if they had all conference tournament winners in and all conference regular season teams in, and just expand the tournament a little bit. So that might be a czar move that I would potentially put in from day one.
I
love it.
You love L Train. Bring it.
This
is the first time we've ever agreed. My God.
Well, don't get too excited because okay. I was thinking there was some justice in the world because you were so close when you finally conceded that expanding the tournament, you're just going to inherit the same problem that you have with a 64-team tournament of who's on the bubble. But expanding to 128 teams.
I'm sorry. Are you taking credit? Are you taking credit for that idea? Is that what just happened?
No, I'm busting your ridiculous bubble tournament idea, which I think clearly has been discredited by history.
If you change the history, then yes, it discredits the history. But well, continue on.
Well, you added 4 more teams and you solved nothing, which I think you've already conceded at that point. But further to your 128 team tournament point, I think we would be taking a major step backward if we're talking about should we include the last place SEC team or the last place Big East team in the tournament over, let's say, the third place Missouri Valley team. Frankly, yes, a high major team, even the last place high major team could do very well against most of the competition in America. But, you had your nice 16 and 13 year, and now it's time to go home.
Can I jump in and say we're going to have to agree to disagree on this?
We can continue on if we need to solve this issue of Lawrence changing history as well.
That's ridiculous. Okay, I'll leave you the last 10 seconds.
Brian, you're the best, brother. So good to talk to you, and we're gonna have to get you back on. All right?
Yeah, it's good talking to you guys.
In the corner, it's Brian Earl. He'll have to shoot it this time. First 3 points of the game for Brian Earl, and Princeton takes the lead again.
I'm so glad that Brian Earl brought up the bubble tournament.
I was going to say, all the years that the three of us have shared going back a while now, and you were just primed and ready for bubble tournament to come out of his lips. And then you pounced, Boogie. So I know Brian is preparing for games over this holiday season. I know he has one waiting for him right after the holiday and had to run. So we let him go, but now you go and continue on your rant about this bubble tournament. The biggest thing for you is not wanting the high majors to already have another crack. I mean, is that basically the short version of it?
I think that would be one unfortunate outcome. And I want to wait until we have Brian Earl back on to hammer out the argument. But
sure,
the heart of the matter was, how do you solve the problem of qualified teams not getting in? When you expanded the field to 68 teams, you solved absolutely nothing. We're still having the exact same debate about who is the last team in. And so expanding to 128 teams, we're just going to go on and on about who's ranked number 128 and who's ranked number 129.
Right. Well, let's pull back the veil a little bit. I would say if you're a high major team in the Big East, who's, by the way, having a really, really good year, as Villanova is always a perennial power and actually is not currently in the top 25, but Providence is, and UConn, and Creighton, I believe, is playing good basketball. DePaul's had some signature wins already under a new coaching staff, but I digress. You're thinking, Lawrence, and you may be thinking incorrectly, but you're thinking on any given day, I can beat Vermont. Now, Becker has done an outstanding job. Everybody who knows college basketball knows that. But that's what they're thinking. This high major coach in the Big East, I don't want to pick on anyone, SEC, whoever, mid-table, they're thinking, I can beat Vermont every day of the week. I belong, and they don't unless they win their conference tournament. So I actually think it's like high majors who are thinking they're worthy more so than some of these mid majors. I'm not saying you have to agree with that, and I'm not saying I agree with that, but I feel like that's kind of the jockeying that's going on behind the scenes.
Well, I think if you're looking for that type of validation, you can talk to your wife, you can talk to your fans, maybe even see a therapist. But the tournament is for the team that win the games on the schedule. All you have to do is win the games on the schedule, and then you can keep playing.
Right. But what if my games, let's get into that. What if my games are tougher? My games are tougher week in and week out. And my games are harder to win than your games. You're running the table in whatever league. I'm battling, ACC, SEC, Big Ten, Big East. I've got my hands full week in and week out. You don't have anywhere near the challenge that I have to win games.
We're out here playing with the AI and no scholarships. So don't preach to me about having a tougher road to get there.
Seems like I touched a nerve.
Don't preach to me.
you went right back to your Ivy League upbringing and rooting. But, again, we're naming names not to offend, but, this is not, it's also beyond the Ivy League. It's, it's America East. It's Patriot League. It's, Horizon League. And I think winning is challenging for everybody. I would say the challenge to get out of a one bid league is as fierce as it gets, where the high major conference, you don't have as much pressure to win the league. You have more opportunities to get quality wins. So now I'm over on your side and taking off the devil's advocate hat, is because you're in those high major conferences, your opportunities to pick up points and signature wins, or however you want to phrase it, are infinitely more than good mid-major teams. They don't have as many opportunities to pick up signature wins during conference play.
So it sounds like the verdict is Gonzaga no longer mid-major. Now they're a high major.
Absolutely.
Are they cemented there? Is there any going back?
That's an awesome question. Wow. When you emerge to be a high major, is there any going back? No, I don't think so. I think, No. And again, I'm only naming names so that, we can all kind of have a similar conversation and I'm not being too obscure, but like, how about this one? And I think it's related to what we're just talking about. Blue blood programs in college basketball. I've got 5 for you. Duke, North Carolina, UCLA, Kentucky, Kansas. And I want to say like 5 plus, I should basically say 6, Indiana. And now I'm tying that to what we just talked about. I think once you've established yourself as a blue blood, i.e., Indiana, UCLA, Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, North Carolina, there's no going back. In my mind, you're always that. And so I'm tying it to what you just asked me. Gonzaga, now that you've emerged to being a high major, there's no going back.
I think you're spot on there. But I think there's also a phenomenon there that's relevant for the mid-majors is bracket creep. So once these mid-major teams become high major teams and they're replaced in their conferences by new teams that acquire the mid-major label, then now we have a pool of teams that are tagged mid-major, but they're completely different in terms of the size of the student body, the enrollment, the academic profile of the school.
Well, you actually just did make me think of something, though, if I can interject, is you just said it. Mid-major programs acquire that label, but they assume it. They proclaim themselves. The king is dead, long live the king. They declare it, okay? But high major, you can't declare that. It's placed on you by outside forces, i.e., conference affiliation, TV, not only TV revenue, but TV contracts. So, hey, you're in a conference and you're in a school where we're going to put you on our linear platforms, not webcast and all that. We're going to put you on, CBS Saturday, game of the week. That's you. Whereas mid-major, that comes from you declaring it for yourself.
Well, 20 years ago, being a mid-major meant something. Gonzaga was the darling of America because they were this small school, great academic school that played very well and competed against teams that had more institutional advantages in terms of building a program. But now, with the conference realignments, it's, like you said, high majors and everybody else. So I went back to the NCAA tournaments, starting with the 2010-2011 tournament, and I looked at the number of multi-bid years of conferences that are typically called mid-major conferences, and ESPN actually gave a list of them. The A10, Conference USA, the Ivy, the Mid-American Conference, Missouri Valley, Mountain West, SoCon, the Southern Conference, the Sun Belt, and the West Coast Conference. They apparently left off the Horizon League.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Right, they left off the WAC. They left off the Colonial.
Yeah, wow.
They left off the Metro Atlantic. Since the 2010-2011 tournament, the A10 has had 10 years with at least 2 bids. Conference USA, 2 years. And just as an aside, that conference was basically gutted by the AAC. Ohio Valley, only 1 year in the last basically 10. Horizon League, 0. Mid-American Conference, 0.
Mm-hmm.
Western Athletic Conference, 0. The Colonial has had 1 year in which they sent more than one team to the NCAA tournament.
Right.
Metro Atlantic had only 1 year since 2010-2011.
So are we going full circle here and saying you're not a mid-major conference if you don't have multiple bids? Ought that be the dividing line?
Well, it could be. Initially, I was thinking that mid-major conferences, true mid-major conferences, were getting screwed by the realignments. But if the line is moving because the mid-major teams are moving into high major conferences, well, there you have it.
I think it's on both ends. And this is where you really have to know the sport and you have to know what's going on, because I actually believe what I just said. But I would also say if the criteria is based on bids, then we also have to look at the criteria used to earn a bid, which continues to change every couple of years. And you and I know right now that that criteria doesn't favor the small guy.
You get no argument from me. I think the deck has always been stacked against the little guy. Right? But are those teams that move from traditional mid-major conferences into high-major conferences, are they high-major now? Butler, Creighton, no longer mid-major? Are they high-major?
I think so, Lawrence. Once you're there, you're there. Butler and Xavier, welcome to the party. You've arrived. Butler puts a pair of Final Fours together. It's hard to argue that they're not among the best basketball programs in the country. And as my dad will remind me, that didn't start, in our era. Butler's been good for years. So Creighton, Xavier, Butler, welcome to the show.
We now come to the segment of our podcast where we answer listener emails. This week's email comes from Brett Tomlinson, who writes, I'm curious to hear how you think the changes to the schedule, a few more weeks in the league season and fewer back-to-backs, will affect how teams approach the Ivy Games this year. If you were coaching, would it change how you prepare? Do you anticipate shorter rotations in the weekends where teams have only one game? And is there any type of team that benefits from this type of schedule, or is it better for everyone across the board?
Brett Tomlinson, terrific to hear from you. And man, just thank you for your friendship over the years and your coverage of Princeton basketball and Princeton University. Indebted to you. And you started out with a wonderful slew of questions. Glad that you're a listener, and we'll try to take a stab at all of them. So let's dive right into it. First and foremost, as a coach, without any doubt, it would change my preparation. If I only have a Saturday game that week, I'm looking at pretty much 4.5 days roughly of being able to prepare. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'll go a little bit lighter on Friday, and I'll roll right into the game. You can also obviously work in an off day anywhere in there, and I know that Ancient Eight coaches, they are really attracted to that, the ability to have an extra off day and maybe nurse some injuries. I also think in my second calling, if you will, as a coach, that so much more focused on player development throughout the entirety of the season. And I think one game per week facilitates that happening a bit more, where you can string out your game preparation throughout the week. And so you can give more repetition and more focus on those second and third unit guys as the season plays out. You're spot on in terms of your rotation, that you can shorten that. If you have only one game to prepare for on Saturday, you can rest your kind of main 7-8 guys or so who are in your playing rotation, and you can just kind of go with them on that Saturday. You don't have to necessarily risk, if you think it's a risk, a few minutes for somebody who might not be quite as prepared in the way that you do on a Friday, Saturday, because without sneaking in some rest during games on Friday, Saturday, you run the risk of kind of running your guys into the ground. Those are some things that you're thinking about as a coach. I'll say this, as a student athlete, I do remember distinctly, we were pretty good, but we also had a unique style of play, and that was an advantage of ours. So on Friday, Saturdays, which is the traditional format, teams would only have 2 days to prepare for us, say Monday, Tuesday, and then 2 days to prepare for Penn, who is also really, really good, say on Wednesday, Thursday. And then boom, Friday, Saturday, those games were coming quick and fast. So I think we, Princeton basketball, or any kind of unique and very good style of play, but unique, they lose a bit of that advantage, competitive advantage, because that Friday, Saturday crunch disappears week in and week out. And some teams benefit from preparing for your distinct style of play with only one game per week. Let's bring Cale Catchings into the conversation, senior captain at Harvard, who had a lot of great things to share with us earlier in the season on our pod. And one of them was just a simple fact that the Friday, Saturday, week in and week out, that gave him a rhythm as a student, where he kind of knew where he could commit to himself academically, Monday through Thursday, knowing his practice schedule. Friday, Saturday, obviously he's plunging himself fully into the games. And then Sunday, knowing that's an off day, week in and week out, he can commit a full day to academics. And that's something that I remember being able to do. And it worked really well for me. Now with this new scheduling, 1 week's a Friday, Saturday, another week's, just a Saturday game. Granted, you're probably able to kind of get some academic stuff done throughout the week. Another week is the MLK Junior game, which I think is an awesome idea for the Ivy League. And I'm so proud of the league for playing on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. But to my point, and what Cale Ketchings might say, it's just unnecessarily disruptive, as a student. I guess as a student athlete and a coach, you're just going to have to deal with it. One other point, and I got to credit Lawrence, my co-host, as we were batting this around back and forth. I want to credit him for this. COVID continues to wreak havoc on the nation and certainly on college athletics with cancellations left and right. This might be the year to put this new scheduling on hold, and let's maybe get through the winter, push the season back, increase our testing if we're not doing it already. Make sure that our athletes and coaches are safe and sound, and maybe push the start of the season back a little bit. Hold to the Friday, Saturdays so that we can get 14 league games in, play the Ivy League tournament, and send our best team off to the NCAA tournament. I'm a little bit worried that if we adopt this new scheduling, it's not a guarantee, but because it's spread out, maybe COVID disrupts things a great deal. Maybe there's a sloppy finish to the season, and an imperfect finish, cancellations, and games that aren't able to be played, and we go limping into the Ivy Madness and maybe not sending our best team, or an imperfect way to find who the best team is. Maybe this might not be the year to adopt that new scheduling, but, we'll just kind of have to wait and see. At the end of it all, I'll say this. I'm a traditionalist, but for a reason. I would love to see Friday, Saturdays, week in, week out, and no Ivy Madness tournament. I know it's been a great showcase for the league, ESPN, publicity, the whole deal, and more teams are in the mix down the stretch. But I also know this, Friday, Saturdays, and no postseason tournament, the Ivy League has always been able to send in that format its best team to the NCAA tournament, get there and win a game or two. Cornell has shown that, Princeton, Penn, Harvard, Yale. So for me, that formula has worked pretty well, but that's a side note. Either way, we really appreciate hearing from you, Brett, and I'm encouraging all of our listeners, please send in your questions, your comments, suggestions for the show. We love to work it into the show. So Ivy League Hoops Hour at gmail.com is how you can find us. And last thing I want to mention, Brett Tomlinson, you've been an outstanding steward of the game and Ivy League athletics, Ivy League basketball in general. You may be an email or phone call away from being invited on as a special guest on the Ivy League Hoops Hour. We'll have to wait and see. For now, that rounds out this segment. And now it's the time in our show where we hand out our non-Ivy League nod of the week. And Lawrence, I think we're going to share with this one and go with the Monmouth Hawks, coached by King Rice. Terrific friend of mine and a class act through and through. And oh, by the way, the guy can coach. The Monmouth Hawks are 10-2, Lawrence, and they are my underdog pick to win the MAC. I think that Coach Patino, for obvious reasons, is getting a lot of acclaim at Iona, but quietly Monmouth is putting together a championship-like season. They've already won at Cincinnati. They've won at Pitt. They've beaten Princeton, who I believe is going to win the Ivy League this year, and they've also beaten Yale, who many people thought going into the season were going to win the league. They also have one of the best defenses in the country. They rank 90th in NCAA Division I basketball in terms of defensive efficiency. So well done, King, with the Monmouth Hawks, and best of luck in the MAC. Now let's spread some love throughout the Ancient Eight. And Lawrence, you've got our nod this week.
This week, we want to acknowledge Sierra Jenkins of Brown Women's Volleyball, who was honored as an honorable mention All-America. Sierra's a sophomore from Orlando, Florida, who helped her team to a 20-6 record and an Ivy League title.
Well done, Miss Jenkins. Player of the Year in the Ivy League and Brown women's volleyball. And now, Lawrence, let's look at the upcoming games in the Ancient Eight. We've got our fingers crossed that folks stay safe and continue to stay healthy and avoid COVID. Had some cancellations last week. Hopefully, games get back on schedule. What do we have coming up for next week?
Lord willing, on Tuesday, December 28th, James Madison comes to Philadelphia to play Penn, and Yale travels to California to play St. Mary's. On Wednesday, December 29th, Harvard visits Kansas, and on Thursday, December 30th, Brown at Maryland.
Harvard at Kansas. What an awesome opportunity for the Crimson to go into Fog Allen Fieldhouse. And yeah, that Yale St. Mary's game, that could be something. Fingers crossed for those games to come off. And obviously, we want our Ivy League teams coming out on top. Whether it's those games, guests, topics, or anything that Lawrence and I covered during the show that you have an opinion on, please don't hold back. Let us know how you feel at Ivy League Hoops Hour at gmail.com and let us know where you stand. Furthermore, don't keep this show to yourselves. Share it with friends, family, colleagues. Encourage them to listen, subscribe, and certainly give us a 5-star rating. Let them all know about the Ivy League Hoops Hour. It's a labor of love for myself and Lawrence, but we want to share it with you all and certainly want to bring in more listeners to the conversation. Thank you for listening to us on this holiday edition. We are excited, already looking forward to next week where we've got something cooked up for you special. Join us this time next week, and we'll let you in on it. Take care now.
It's Christmas, Theo. It's the time of miracles, so be of good cheer and call me when you hit the last lock.